All right, we're going to talk about the last item here on the list, and that is a hatch command. And hatch patterns, they can be called pochés, they're zip tones, you can do all kinds of things with this, but what we really need for hatch patterns is we need boundary objects. So at this point, I'm just going to create a couple of some random objects, all different types of random objects that I can use as boundaries for these next patterns to work. I'm going to create a polyline. And we're starting to look a little bit like a 1980s album cover, but that's okay. Maybe one more across the bottom here. Ooh, I don't want that. I want one of these. And that'll work. That'll do for now. Okay. Hatches. We'll click on the hatch icon, which also happens to be H at the command prompt. And you'll notice that this entire ribbon up here at the top has changed. Now, most of these hatches that you'll see up in here, ANSI, anything that starts with an ANSI, is designed for automotive use, and that starts off with some very, very small spaces to be hatched. I mean, we're talking about automotive parts and nuts and bolts, and they can be very, very small. What I'm going to start with, well, I'll start with the solid pattern, which you can either left click here, or you can actually change up here. And you'll notice we have some other options here that we can deal with, and we'll get to that in a moment. We'll go through all of these. But its first point, the first thing it says pick an internal point. Well, an internal point is simply like a flood tool or a bucket tool that you're used to using in Paint or Illustrator or Photoshop. And a flood tool will only work if the boundary is closed. It doesn't matter what the boundary is doing. So if I left click here, and there we go, there's a fill, a solid fill in this area, and it's a completely enclosed spot. If I come over here and I left click again, then I have another filled area. And let's say, just say for the sake of argument that I'm done with this, and I'm going to push, I can either push return, I can push the space bar, or I can come up here and I can click close. They all pretty much amount to the same thing. Now you'll notice that both of these fills, they're two separate fills, but it's a single object. And you'll notice when I select them, I have most of those exact same tools back. Okay, now I'm going to go up here, I'm going to click options. I want to separate these hatches. So each one of those filled objects is its own selectable entity, and they can be changed and selected independently of one another. Okay, and we can go back and we can, I'm going to undo this command. We'll undo the hatch edit, and we'll undo the hatch creation. So that's Control Z, or you can type U at the command prompt, push the space bar, or hit enter. Back to the hatch. I want a solid. When I can select under options, I can select create separate hatches when I'm creating these objects instead of editing them after the fact. So I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to select that one. And you'll notice that now AutoCAD is trying to be helpful. It's actually trying to catch up. The processor is trying to keep track of what I'm doing. By previewing, you notice I haven't clicked yet, but it's previewing. This is the area that I'm going to fill if you left click here. So left click, and I'm done with that. Push return, hit the space bar, it amounts to the same thing. Now one of the nice things about hatch patterns and hatch fills is if I highlight these two lines that make up the boundary for this pattern and for this pattern, if I modify these lines, my pattern will go with it. Only to a point. If I grab a hold of this end of the line and I delete it all the way across here, my hatch pattern is now broken I have to do some other things to make that work right. I'm going to undo that command.